You know, these days, the life in the church for those seeking the truth can be pretty complicated business. I have promised people that I'm not going to tell you when things are great only or when things are bad only. If the new pope does something good, we will talk about it here, like we are going to today. And when he does not so great things, like with some of his appointments lately, we will also talk about that as well. You have to be dedicated to the truth and not just, I don't know, hope for the best and ignore reality. If you're going to pay attention to these things, you have to be willing to take the good with the bad and vice versa. And so today we're going to talk about that. And first, we're going to go to what happened this morning in Rome. Michael Haynes posted this video clip. Pope Leo XIV ordained 11 priests from the Diocese of Rome today in St. Peter's. Due to his mobility issues, the last time Pope Francis ordained priests was in 2021. That does not mean that there weren't priests ordained in Rome, but it wasn't just Francis wasn't doing it himself for the last 4 years or so of his pontificate. And so you see the ordination of 11 priests for the Diocese of Rome. And thanks be to God, the Diocese of Rome, like everywhere else, desperately needs more priests. And you've seen the traditional laying on of hands by the bishop. Remember, one of the principal duties of the Pope is that he is the Bishop of Rome. Typically, the governing of the Diocese of Rome is delegated to an apostolic vicar of some kind, somebody who essentially governs in the Pope's name, because he's a little busy most of the time. But it is nice to see him doing the traditional work of the Pope and doing it in a manner befitting the office. So that happened this morning. In fact, when I was originally planning this live stream, I wasn't planning to cover that because it just hit my X feed in the last 10 minutes. So we have that. And we'll go to CathCon for the main story here. He had a meeting. The Pope had a meeting with several, it's not so much a meeting. He sent a message, a telegram, literally a telegram to the bishops of Latin America. He says, the Pope asked Latin American and Caribbean bishops for solutions according to the criteria of sacred scripture, tradition, and the magisterium. Notes CathCon, not one mention of the Second Vatican Council or the new springtime, and one mention of synod. It will soon be winter if they carry on as they are, caught in some ghastly post-conciliar stasis of mismanaged decline. That's a really hot take on it, but we have been living in a lie promulgated from the top, saying that for the last 60 years since the close of the council, we have been in a new springtime of evangelization. Meanwhile, vocations numbers decline. And it has looked a lot like managed decline for a long time. Seen in your life by a parish near you or your own parish having been closed. The creation of parish clusters. All this kind of nonsense. On top of which, the parishes that are growing and vibrant and average age of 30 years old or something are the traditionalist ones, and they get closed down. It's a managed decline. And so it's nice to see a message from the Pope that doesn't play these games of new springtime and kumbaya. Instead, solutions according to scripture, tradition, and the magisterium. Nice to see certain things not included there. We'll go to the Vatican's website for the very brief message of the Holy Father. I'm not sure why it's all in caps. If you see things like this in caps, it does, especially if like in a comment section or in a live chat, it looks like people are yelling. But this is an actual telegram that he sent, pretty old-fashioned way to do it, of the Holy Father to the bishops of the Latin American Bishops' Conference. His Eminence Cardinal Jamie Spangler, Archbishop of Porto Alegre, President of CELAM. CELAM is the Central and South American Bishops' Conference. On the occasion of the 40th General Ordinary Assembly of CELAM, commemorating the 70th anniversary of the first conference of the Latin American Episcopate and the creation of the Episcopal Council, I warmly greet all the bishops of Latin America and the Caribbean, joined in a collegial spirit to discern together the current challenges to the Church in Latin America, and to seek in effective and effective communion pastoral initiatives that lead to solutions in accordance with the criteria of the sacred scripture, tradition, and the magisterium. I join in giving thanks to the Lord for the celebration of this happy event, which reminds us that the Latin American and Caribbean Episcopal Council is a sign of collegiality, as well as the means of contact, collaboration, and service to the Episcopal Conferences of Latin America in the task of evangelization and pastoral attention to the holy, faithful pilgrim people of God in this beloved continent. In the current historical situation, in which a large number of men and women suffer the tribulations and poverty caused by continuing crises on a continental and global scale, we urgently need to remember that it is the risen one present in our midst who protects and heals the church, restoring hope to her through the love that has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. See the letter to the Romans chapter 5. Earnestly beseeching him to strengthen her in her mission, to go out to meet so many brothers and sisters, to proclaim to them the message of salvation of Jesus Christ, and to share with them the joy that comes from a personal encounter with him. As I thank Selim for the service of missionary animation it provides in these Latin American lands, I ask you to pray to the Good Shepherd for me, that I may always be faithful to the ministry in favor of the universal church that she has wished to entrust to me. While invoking the constant protection of Our Lady of Guadalupe, I impart to you from my heart the apostolic blessing as a pledge of abundantly heavenly gifts. Signed, Leo XIV. And I found this really interesting because, again, not really much of a mention of synodality, and none. What you have here is a mention of collegiality. And in the context, collegiality is one of those really dicey subjects in the post-conciliar church, because there are some who advocate in the hierarchy that the bishops as a body have the same or very similar magisterial authority as the Pope. That is what we would call a false collegiality. They do not have the same authority as the Pope, even as a body. However, collegiality in this sense seems to be the bishops meeting together to talk about the issues facing the people of the Caribbean and South and Central America. And in that way, that's probably fine. That's just a function of ecclesiastical solidarity, basically, and subsidiarity, dealing with issues that are larger than they can handle. Now, what I've liked to have seen, and maybe he'll do this in the future, is addressing the elephant in the room with Central and South America, which is the large-scale apostasy happening and heresy happening. And by heresy, I mean people leaving the faith to go become Pentecostals or Presbyterians. Because in South and Central America, those false ways to Christ are making gigantic inroads. And people are leaving Catholicism. And they're doing so partially because their bishops are liberation theologians who brag about having never baptized an indigenous child in their entire lives. I mean, the heinous things they said after the Pachamama debacle. If you remember the Pan-Amazon Synod of 2019, where the Pachamama idol was raised up, and if Catholics ever were scandalized, especially after they admitted that, yeah, it's not actually the Virgin Mary, it is actually a pagan idol. When they admitted that, you had some of these bishops talking about, like, bragging how they had never baptized a child in their life. These are bishops saying this stuff, and how they had no intention of ever baptizing an indigenous child, that they would be happy to let them remain in pagan darkness. One of the things that the new Pope can do with a missionary background is to reignite the flame of the missionary spirit in the hearts of Central and South America, a continent that was originally converted to the faith through missionary zeal, to rekindle that, because a large number of faithful there do not believe they're being fed or nourished spiritually by the church. And so they go seek it elsewhere. And then they have encounters with missionaries who promote a false gospel to them, offer them new ways to God. And it seems to work. Some of these missionary groups from false groups are very crafty. They are the same people who will tell you that venerating the Virgin Mary is idolatry, while allowing in their missionary groups to use images of Our Lady of Guadalupe to lead people out of the Catholic Church and into Protestantism. I've had conversations about this with missionaries and with people from South and Central America who've seen this stuff firsthand. Just like they're the same people who saw the Pachamama worship locally in those countries firsthand, and were mortified that anybody in Rome would, one, let that happen in the Vatican, but two, that they were trying to pass it off as the Virgin Mary, when they know full well that since they come from those countries, that it was not the Virgin Mary. But in general, a lack of any reference in that statement to synodality and all this other stuff is good, and solutions to those problems rooted in the gospel, magisterial authority, and sacred tradition is good. And I would like to see those things he said there reflected in the actions he takes in appointing bishops. Because the appointments he's made recently have been less than good. In fact, they've been pretty bad. This is why report on the good when it happens, like with this address, the short message to those bishops, as well as the bad. I'm curious, though, very curious what you think of his message there. And as somebody said, Byrne is saying in the chat, a large portion of the church has fallen into Gnosticism, don't even realize it. I mean, if by that you mean so many people have essentially personalized their faith, taking what they want and leaving the rest, I mean, yeah, it's basically that. It's a choose your own adventure religion for most people at this point. And that's how most Christianity is. Oh, I don't believe God would condemn XYZ sin, even though scripture is very clear. So is the tradition of the faith. AKC with the super chat. Thank you very much. Leo will be a traditional acting pope, and the bishop's doing the dirty work going forward. Like in Charlotte, it's the next phase of decentralization. That is my fear. We will see how Rome reacts to Bishop Martin. It was reported, I don't have this news story brought up, but it feels like this is a good time to talk about this, that in April, Bishop Martin had a meeting with then Cardinal Prevost, prefect of the dicastery for the bishops. And the then prefect, Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, told him to slow down with his implementations. Don't just ram it all through. He didn't tell him to stop. He told him to slow down and get to know your people. That is a lot different than stopping. Now, why he chose to just try to ram it all through anyway, at this point, who knows? It's actually a blessing that he tried, because when you try to do all the things that letter I covered the other day said at one go, people notice. People notice. But if you do it incrementally, say you make an announcement that any woman who wants to be a Eucharistic minister or a cantor or read from the altar or serve at the to assist at the altar cannot wear a veil, you'll ruffle a few feathers. You might get somebody like me talk about it briefly, but it'll come and go. The same with the altar rail stuff and all the other things. If you do those incrementally, it'll be a long time before anybody notices what's happened. But when you put one gigantic letter out like that, everybody's going to notice. Incrementally is a much smarter, more devious way to do those kinds of things. And that's just the truth here. Now, we're going to go on to a pressing story that I think is worth talking about here. And I'm probably going to clip this because it's so important. There's a lot of misinformation being spread here. There's a lot of questions about this story. So I may clip this. You may see this as a video in a day or two. But here we have a story that I've seen shared on social media. A historic monastery in Egypt, located at Mt Sinai, a monastery connected to prophecy. It has been continuously run by a group of Eastern Orthodox monks, going back to apostolic times, has allegedly been taken by the government of Egypt. It's caused an international firestorm. So we're going to go to the story here, because this is one that is only being half told when people share this on social media. So we're going to try to clear the air on this so everybody knows. We go here to the National Herald for the story that is, as it is being shared on social media. This is the story most people are seeing. There's more to it than this. But the headline is, Historic St. Catherine's Monastery faces closure and seizure by Egypt. There's the monastery, located at Mount Sinai. Yes, that Mount Sinai. Let's get to the details of the article. Quote, in a drastic and controversial move, Egypt has closed St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, the oldest continuously operating Christian monastery in the world. This decision has drawn strong criticism from Archbishop Laranmos, who has described it as another historic blow to Hellenism and Orthodoxy. The Greek government was reportedly caught off guard by the action, especially since the issue was discussed recently during a meeting between Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. The Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs is actively handling the matter, viewing it as extremely important. According to orthodoxia.info, St. Catherine's Monastery was founded by Byzantine Emperor Justinian and around 15 centuries ago, and holds significant international prestige and reverence. Despite numerous historical challenges, the monastery has endured until today. Egypt's decision, however, infringes upon religious freedoms by converting the monastery into a museum and transferring its assets to the Egyptian government. This move starkly contradicts assurances given by the Egyptian president during his recent visit to Greece. Beyond property seizure, Egypt is also evicting the monks from the monastery so that its buildings can become a tourist attraction similar to the pyramids. In response, the monks view this action as a severe violation of their rights and are preparing an international campaign to alert Christian churches and other monotheistic religions about their plight. And that is where the story ends when it comes to how people are talking about this online. So we're going to give you a few updates. And I'm going to start with one from Hillary White, who is not one to bang the drum of Catholic prophecy unfolding. In fact, she very much kind of isn't like that. Now, if you're not familiar with Hillary White, you should follow her on X and anywhere else you might find her. She is a former professional writer, is very knowledgeable about art, like the history of Christian art, and you will learn a lot following her. But she's also got some hot takes. So she's got her sources. Update from St. Catherine's. Generally against the kind of cheap, sensationalistic, spooky nonsense one finds online, but I'm ready to believe the abbot of St. Catherine's. As one abbot told us in a phone call from Jerusalem yesterday, if Sinai is lost, the end is near. Posted from a source to a social media group dedicated for the Eastern Orthodox. The spokesman of the Monastery of Sinai spoke clearly this morning on Open TV. Yesterday's announcement by Egypt regarding the Monastery of Sinai is wishful thinking. We need to read between the lines. At this moment, as he mentioned, we are guests in the monastery and it is on its way to becoming a museum. Father Peripherios asked that the Egyptian government be questioned as to whether the building of the monastery belongs to them or not, and we will get to that in a moment. Since in their announcement yesterday, they stated that they are allowing them to live monastically and to continue their religious duties. Essentially, they're considered guests, and at any moment, they could be expelled. Elsewhere, he pointed out that the false prophet himself, in a written document, granted ownership of the monastery to the monks and placed it under the protection of the followers of the crescent moon. Don't listen to those who say that nothing is changing at the Monastery of Sinai. The truth is different, and some are playing games at the expense of the monks. The Monastery of Sinai is the second Hagia Sophia. Woe to us if we lose it, because then Pandora's box will be opened. As one abbot told us in a phone call from Jerusalem yesterday, if Sinai is lost, the end is near. Now, remember all those caveats. He's essentially saying that somebody is lying, and this is why we now go to what the government of Egypt has said. We can go to the Greek Reporter. Headline: Egypt affirms St. Catherine Monastery status after court clarification. This happened yesterday. There's again a beautiful shot of that place. And I think every apostolic Christian should stand together on this. This predates the East-West schism by many centuries. We should all be interested in defending this. From the article: Egypt has reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to safeguarding the Monastery of St. Catherine of Sinai, emphasizing that a recent court ruling has further solidified its protected status. Cairo said that the court ruling, which was mistakenly interpreted as a prelude to the seizure and closure of the world's oldest continuously functioning Christian monastery, does the exact opposite. It safeguards its future. The Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs dismissed rumors of any threat to the monastery. Spokesperson clarified: the Monastery of St. Catherine and its historic sites remain completely unaffected. Its religious and archaeological significance, along with its seminary, remain fully intact. The spokesperson highlighted that this legal ruling marks the first formal recognition and assurance of the monastery's sanctity. They explained that while contracts have been signed for certain nearby areas to be designated as natural reserves, the court has upheld the monks' rights to access and use these religious and archaeological sites to preserve their spiritual significance. He emphasized that areas designated as state land due to a lack of valid ownership documents are located far from inhabited regions and have no impact on the monastery. Emphasizing the importance of accuracy and avoiding premature conclusions, the spokesperson urged careful consideration of the court's decision. He also underscored Egypt's dedication to maintaining its deep historical ties with Greece, urging respect for these enduring relations. And yada, yada, yada. You get the idea. But they are not buying this in a lot of places. As you saw, the Eastern Orthodox tend to think that this is still an attempt to seize their property, and not just their property, but a incredibly historically significant monastery. It is the Hagia Sophia of monasticism, basically. And if that goes, at least in the eyes of some of the Eastern Orthodox, you should be preparing yourself for the final days. I'm curious what you think about, because as Elizabeth says, Hagia Sophia is now a temple of the crescent moon and museum now because the Eastern Christians did not fight to protect their land. It is pretty complicated, but yes, and the fact that it's still after almost 6 centuries now in their hands is a tragedy of history. Byrne says, I mean, the Eastern Christians fought. They were just really bad at it and constantly suffering plagues and other disasters. And there was some geopolitics stuff, too, at the time that didn't exactly help either. I'm curious, though, if you see this narrative being played out online, just remember that the story involving the Orthodox in this is a lot more complicated than most of the initial reporting. There are now secular courts involved in this and political leaders involved in this. And this could turn into a giant international problem. But the Egyptian government says, no, we're taking lands that are near the monastery, but not really important to the monks. And we're going to protect it as state property. And if any of those lands do have religious significance, the monks will still have access to them. We shall see. We shall see. Jeremiah says, we have been played and lied to for nearly 300 years about the truth of the... Well, Jeremiah, not a subject for today's live stream, but Joe Blogs, church is more important than the material Roman Empire. That's why God didn't spare Byzantium. Yes, but they did also keep essentially the Roman Empire and the Christian Roman Empire alive for a very, very long time, long after the Western Empire fell. John Plick says, the monks who occupy are far more significant than any archaeology. This is true, but those are still treasures of the church, and they should actually be preserved. And I'll use the more inclusive church term in this, because of all the ecumenical relations that are important, the East-West ones and healing that schism are probably the most important. Even if it's usually you'll find out when you do a little digging, most of the discussion of the East and West reuniting is mostly Catholics who speak about that. The Orthodox rarely speak about that stuff themselves. Egypt is recognized as a refuge for the Holy Family. It will be targeted by the adversary. Yes. James says, thank you for the story about St. Catherine's. It was the first I'd heard of this. I'd seen it going through my first on X, and then it went over from X to Facebook. And once it hit Facebook, I was like, okay, we need to talk about this, because it is being spoken about in ways that are not exactly accurate. It's just that first story. And it's now becoming a very complicated geopolitical issue in a way that only makes sense when you understand the role of faith and politics and how they're interconnected in Greece and in Egypt and other places. Because as somebody here in the live chat said, says nothing secular about Egyptian government or law. It's the crescent moon stuff there. Yeah, it's true. But secular, we'll use the term secular here, and literally meaning their government operates in the secular realm, even if it's highly influenced by their false prophet. All right, folks, keeping it short today. If there's any thoughts on this in the chat, let me know. Go through the super chats again. Nolo, channel member with his free channel member super chat. If you are a member of the channel through that join button below, you get a free super chat once a month. And that's true on any YouTube channel. YouTube gives us to you. Please use them. Nolo says, good guys are constrained to be good, but bad guys can appear like good guys as it suits them. And that is something to remember in this crisis in the church. When you get confused about, say, I don't know, we'll say adjustments to the hierarchy being made that look very bad, followed by very good sounding speeches and things, always remember that. We are in a complicated situation. Elizabeth says, tomorrow should be start of Humility Month in honor of the sacred. And yes, this reminds me, I received an email from somebody who asked if we could promote some kind of novena or something for the month of the Sacred Heart. June is, in the secular world, James Martin's favorite month. In past years, every year, without fail, in the month of June, Father James Martin S.J. would post a letter, a handwritten letter he received from Pope Francis, and put it up on his website. And people disputed those until he started taking pictures himself, Francis would, with one of James Martin's closest allies and putting it up on the Vatican website. At that point, people accepted it was real. It'll be interesting to see what happens on that front with Leo. I'm not expecting pen pal status with James Martin, and I hope I'm not wrong about that. However, it would be good to, as we are about to enter the hardest month of the year for many Catholics, because of this stuff that just gets in your face this time of year, to do some kind of act of penance every time you see it. It could be just I don't know, whatever prayer immediately comes to mind, whether it's a Hail Mary or you know, the Jesus prayer, whatever it is, or something more formalized like a novena. It could be also a full extra decade of the rosary when you pray the rosary every day for the month. There's a lot you could do. You could take on extra fasting. I will, however, say this. Last year, June, first deadly sin month, was muted compared to the previous years. The changing political tides were very obvious by June, and it was much more muted. We've already heard for this year a lot of businesses, a lot of corporations saying they don't want anything to do with this now. The ones who still want to fund their little parades and things, have said, we'll give you money, don't put our name on this. Okay, they're not publicly endorsing things. I expect this to be even more muted this year, but I could be wrong. But every time you see something, do an act of reparation. Short act of reparation, maybe some voluntary abstinence of some kind, some voluntary suffering you take on, something to do as an act of reparation. And the best thing I could tell you to do as an act of reparation, now that I think about it, is if you have not ever started or completed the 5 First Saturdays devotion. A week from today is the first Saturday. I've got a few videos on this channel about the 5 First Saturdays. It's asked for by Our Lady of Fatima. It's the part that the laity are supposed to be doing to fulfill the Fatima message. You're supposed to wear the brown scapular. You're supposed to get enrolled in the brown scapular, pray the little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and keep the 5 First Saturdays devotion. It's a great time to start doing all those things. And this is above and beyond the Sabbatine privilege. If you want to live the Fatima message, it's just a step above the Sabbatine privilege, the normal brown scapular promises. Sister Lucia said this stuff herself to a Catholic priest in the 1950s who sought out a meeting with her because he suspected that was the case, and he got her to confirm it. And I've done a video on that too in the past, but this is a great month to start those acts of penance, acts of reparation. We could turn the first deadly sin month into something glorious. Shawnee, JD says, Sede, no, I'm not a Sedevacantist. SSPX, I'm friendly to them, but I haven't been to Mass with them in ages. Thoughts on Christian Wagner? I follow him on X. Seems like a good guy on X. I've never watched any of his videos, though. I know he's much more, we'll say, mainstream friendly than I am, but that's about it. But I'm not going to say, I have a general rule. I'm not going to come onto YouTube and say negative things about another content creator unless I have a very, 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 very good reason to do so. I will caution people that the worst kind of content you will ever see on YouTube, aside from like impure immodesty stuff, is people going on there to try to start drama with another YouTuber. Regardless of the niche you're watching. You could be watching fishing videos. I'm sure there's a YouTube community of fishing YouTubers. And I'm sure there have been people there who try to start drama with other fishing YouTube community members. It's the worst kind of content. The people who start the battles will always sit there to try to bait the other person doing a reaction or response video to them so they can drive clicks for their channel. That's it. That's all it's for. Resist the temptation to participate in that stuff. That stuff happens all the time. And I won't talk about other YouTubers unless I have something either positive or neutral to say. For instance, I've never hidden the fact when Michael Lofton's name comes up that I don't care for his content. It's not for me. That's as negative as I will usually go. In fact, I will say, what was his name? Bishop Mari Emanuel was his name. He had him on his channel and let him speak unfiltered. I couldn't do that. My hat, if I wore one, would be off to Michael Lofton for doing that, and he nearly lost everything for that interview. Resist the urge for e-drama. there's always people trying to do it. It's always for stupid reasons. So what do I think on Christian Wagner? What I've seen of him on X, I like. Even though he and I probably would not agree on the crisis in the church. And I'll leave you with that. Pray for anybody today that may have even hinted at speaking about negatively. We're not here to drive you to anger and dark thoughts about people. Pray for anybody we spoke about. Pray for the Greek Orthodox monks and for the political figures in Greece and Egypt who are going to have to hammer out that situation. Pray for the Holy Father that his appointments match what he said in that address, that everything be driven by the love of the gospel, by the tradition and the magisterium of the church. Yvonne, just found you trying to gauge your disposition. You could call me recognize and resist. I'm pro SSPX, but haven't been a mass with him in years. So I'm not anti-SSPX. I think Archbishop Lefebvre was a hero. You want to know my stance on things, because I can't imagine why anybody at this point would be against him. But beyond that, I hate e-drama. I hate it. You want to destroy a YouTube community, dive down into that rabbit hole. I've seen it happen many times. Richard Korn says, I use the Little Office. I use the 1962 edition published by Angelus Press. You can buy it on Amazon. My only complaint about that edition of it is that the book will fall apart after about a year. But it's cheap, so you can easily replace it. And you do the red, say the black. You have to know the liturgical calendar when you do it. And I do recommend the 62. The prayers are more traditional than in the later revisions. The syntax of the later revisions of it are cringy, like very modern, very kind of loose. Whereas at least you get a little bit of the higher level English, more formalized prayers that keep your mind in a place, knowing that you're doing something important. Do I have anything like a book list you'd recommend? On returntotradition.org, there actually is a book list. Probably should repost it. It's a Crisis in the Church reading list that goes from essentially entry level, like you have no idea what's going on, to intermediary and more advanced, depending on your knowledge level. It's got all sorts of stuff on there, including, yes, Taylor Marshall's Infiltration. Infiltration gets ripped on by people because they know a lot about the crisis in the church and they think it's too simplistic. But that's exactly the book someone who doesn't know, really, like they're new to noticing there's problems in the church, it's probably a good place to start. So but yeah, I have one on returntotradition.org. I should probably go repost it because it's been buried down there pretty deep. Anyway, thanks very much, folks. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.